All right, so we are recording now. It really gives me great pleasure to introduce my friend, John Foster, who's going to give you a really great talk this morning. I've known John now for several years, mostly through the Freedom Fest that we often go to together. And then last year, on the Freedom Fest pitch contest that we did, John was actually our winner. And so that's with that brief introduction, John. I'm going to let you tell a little bit about yourself and middle school MBA and so forth, and give your talk. So, with that, John, take it away.
Oh, can you enable sharing,
Oh, of
Paul?
course.
Um,
Let's see here.
and I'll, yeah, so good morning, everybody. I'm John Foster. Great to be with you. I can't believe Paul has dragged you out at this crazy hour on the West Coast.
They can't believe it either.
I'm on East Coast time, so it's quite a very comfortable hour for me. But so let me see how I can, let me see. It's always a little bit of a deal to get started with the sharing on these things. Um, all right, I'm just going to share.
Rigo, looks like you're sharing now.
So you seen middle school MBA now?
We do.
Okay. Let me if I let me see what happens if I run this as a in presenter mode. I don't know if it's going to make it goofy for you guys. Let me try that. I'm gonna stop that. And well, I'm not sure I can make that work.
The other one was fine.
All right, let's see how this goes.
John, what part of the East Coast are you on?
I'm actually in Eastern Tennessee,
Oh, wow.
right on the edge of the Central and Eastern time zone.
Yeah.
Now,
Again, guys, make sure that you fill out the attendance roster that's going around. Where is the attendance roster right now? Okay, keep it moving. And you might even send it back around in case someone came in a few minutes after it started. Yeah, we can see it now, John.
okay, so it's up now. It's a full screen.
Yeah, yeah.
Great, great. Okay, so good morning, guys. Great to be with you. Um, so I'm John Foster. As Paul said, I'm the president of Middle School MBA, and that's exactly what it sounds like. It's an executive MBA for middle school kids. Um, our shtick is having figured out how to teach really the very most advanced topics to the youngest kids. And what I wanted to do today was talk to you guys about economics, um, particularly Austrian economics. And I want to take a really broad view here, because economics is a really broad topic. Um, so, I like to equate it to physics. Physics is similarly extremely broad. If you go pick up a physics journal and thumb through the articles there, they are into everything. They're doing chemical kinetics, they're doing astronomy, they're doing materials, you name it. They're involved in everything in the physical world. That's what they do. And the whole universe is divided up between plants, animals, and minerals. Everything is one of those things. And of course, animals and plants are alive, minerals are dead, right? Minerals simply have properties that define what they are. Plants and animals actually can respond to their environment, they can grow, they're different. And within the animals, we have humans. And humans are different than the other animals in that humans have a is it can be hard to define, different people. You can argue about um, the details, but humans have a consciousness. They can they have a different brain. They can think about the future, however you want to say it. Humans are clearly distinct from animals. And economics is about human behavior, how humans act, particularly how they behave in groups. Because if we look at these animals, at all the animals, in fact, plants and animals, well, let's stick with the animals. Um, every animal since the beginning of time has shown up on the planet basically naked and afraid, and has had to figure out how to survive, how to keep living, how to remain among the living with the things that are around them in the environment. Uh, and humans the same way. Humans had to. We showed up. We had to figure out how to find something to eat, find a way to get out of the elements, find a way to protect ourselves from the other animals, and and so humans had to act, and humans behave in certain purposeful ways in order to manage that. And so the one of the great Austrian books is called Human Action, and it's this is what economics is about is how humans act in order to further their lives, and in particular how humans act with respect to each other. We're social animals, and and our success in rising above the other animals, we started out very much like them, and we've we've managed to rise above that, and that's because of our social behaviors and our cooperation and those things, and that's what economics is really about. You have a lot of people today who have tried to mathematize it like crazy and make it about numbers and make it kind of wonky and something that only the smart people do. But in fact, it's really about humans and how they behave. And there's another book here that you may have heard of, Economics in One Lesson, and it's written by a famous Austrian economist. Henry Hazlitt was a columnist, I think, for Time magazine for a long time, and possibly the New York Times back in the early 1900s, 1930s, 40s. Um, and this was sort of his seminal book, Economics in One Lesson. And I'll just tell you the one lesson. And that one lesson is that there are good economists and bad economists. And what a good economist does is they look at the effect of some policy across all parties and across all time. And a bad economist just looks at the effect on a single party or a small group of parties and not everybody. So when you do the bad economist uh, operation, you're able to kind of act like a magician, where with one hand I'm distracting you. Look at this. Look at this great thing that I'm doing for Peter, without showing you that over here on this hand I'm robbing Paul, right? Or I guess that goes the other way, robbing Peter to pay Paul. Um, and so that's a bad economist who only shows you what happens to Paul, but doesn't show you Peter. A good economist looks at both of them and says, what's the impact on both these guys? Not just right now, but out into the future, because maybe we do something wonderful for Peter today. We buy him a bunch of cookies, and that makes him fat and unhealthy down the road. And so, in fact, we have to take into account the full range of our action, not just what happens today. So that's the difference between a good and a bad economist. And so when we talk about economics, we need to talk about a very, very broad picture. Um, and also, Paul, I know I can't hear the your students, but you can, I assume.
Yes, I can. And you'll be able to hear them probably too a little bit later on if
Oh,
you have
okay.
questions. Yeah.
So I want to encourage everybody. I'm going to say a lot of things that may challenge your current notions of economics, and and again, this is a broad, sweeping discussion, and so there's not time to dig into the all the background on each crazy assertion I may make. And so what I would like you to do is when there's something that doesn't sit well with you, it doesn't add up or whatever, I'd like you to go ahead and challenge it, question. So wait, how does that work? Or I don't understand how this fits or whatever, because that'll help guide us in sort of customizing this to your perspective and what you already know. And I won't bore you with drilling into a bunch of things that you're already aware of. So please feel free to pipe up at any time, and I hope we'll have time at the end also for questions and answers. So
Yes,
very
so
broad
just speak
discussion.
up, guys, if you have any questions or anything, and if he can't hear you, I'll relay the questions. By the way, let me just remind you that most universities don't like students, pictures or names, revealed in a form like this that's recorded. So you're completely anonymous here. And so if you do say something, don't say your name, and they can't see your face either. It's all blurred and so forth. Anyway, that's just probably most of you don't care, but again, that's kind of what most universities their policies are. I'm sorry. So go ahead, John.
Great. So I want to start by talking about and I'm sorry, my slide got a little funky here. The marginal revolution. Um, I assume you guys have talked about that um, in
Not a
class.
lot, not a lot. Marginal revolution. This will be new to them.
So, so the marginal revolution, what's referred to in economics as the marginal revolution, um, happened in 1871. This was the the realization of the true nature of value. Where does value come from? That's been uh, a question that eluded people for a very long time and caused a lot of trouble. Finally, in 1871, it was figured out, and um, that's that time. The other thing that goes along with the reason it's called the marginal revolution is because one of the outcomes of discovering the true nature of value is that decisions are made at the margin. It's always, what if I hire one more person? What will that do to my business? What if I sell one more unit of my product? What would that mean to my revenues and my costs and my profits? And and in life, it's the same way. What if I ate one more cookie, or what if I didn't eat one more cookie? What would be the impact there? And so that's the way we all operate. All the action happens at the margin. So this was known as the marginal revolution. But I want to say, I claim it's the maximal revolution. This is one of the biggest revolutions in human thought that's ever happened, and it's thoroughly unappreciated in most quarters. Um, it's also the value revolution. It's the revolution in how we understand value, and we'll go into some more depth on that. But I just want to emphasize how important this is. This is perhaps the biggest change in human thinking ever in history. It's far more important than the fact that the Earth goes around the sun and not the other way around. even though that was an enormous revolution in thought. Um, the this revolution is much bigger than that, and possibly even bigger than the idea that the world is round and not flat. So this is really, really a big deal. It's vastly underappreciated in most quarters. And so what I want to do is step back and kind of look at the history of this a bit. So this is sort of a timeline going from all the way back. Aristotle is basically the beginning of almost everything. Um, so from Aristotle going through the fall of Rome and the medieval period and now into modern times. And here's the marginal revolution happening in 1871. So this is a relatively recent event. And so what happened was Aristotle, as he was wont to do, he would look around and observe the world and say, what is the nature of what's happening here? Whether it was, in the realm of physics, uh, astronomy, or anything. His thing was, what's the nature of what I'm seeing? What are the underlying laws that govern this thing? And what he saw around him was people engaged in commerce. They were goods, they were making things, they were selling things, they were trading things, they were using money, they were charging each other interest, they would issue credit. So all these things are going on. There were prices, and these prices, this is tricky. These prices conferred some sort of value. And English almost doesn't have enough words to tease out these differences. And we often kind of conflate them together, and there really is overlap. So if this, it's not surprising that this has been confusing for thousands of years, and it still quite confuses a lot of people today. But but he saw these prices in the market, and that conferred some sort of value, and everybody seemed to know what they were, even though there wasn't somebody issuing a proclamation that said the price of wheat is, I don't know what the Greeks use for money, but 20 dinars or whatever today. Nobody was doing that, but yet everybody seemed to know what the price of wheat was. That's kind of crazy. These prices just seem to show up spontaneously. And similarly for money, money is just there. It's almost like we were born with it. People are using it. They know what it is. They know what it means. They're charging interest. They all seem to know what the rate of interest should be. And so what the heck's going on there? And so Aristotle thought about these things, and a lot of things he got right. He understood that production happened step by step, that you go grab a bunch of raw materials and then you would modify them and make a product, and then you sell that product. So that whole process was pretty clear. But there were a lot of things that he got wrong. Um, One of the things he got wrong was value. He thought that the value of a product came from the inputs for that product, the work and the resources that went into it. And that's quite plausible. It just turns out to be wrong. In having that wrong value wrong, when he thought about money and he saw interest being charged for money, he thought that was a problem. He said, if I give you two gold coins this week and you give me those same two gold coins back next week, why are you going to give me something extra? This is something funky going on here. And he thought that money should be sterile. And that was, I don't know if it was the beginning, but there's been throughout history this very strong suspicion of interest and money changing. And there have been rules against it, or at least limiting usury laws that say oh, if you charge more than X amount of interest, that's illegal because it's just immoral to, to charge so much. Really, you should charge zero. And I mean, Jews have been run out of certain areas of the world over issues exactly like that. So this has been a very strong conviction that has carried over all the way from Aristotle's time, rooted in not really understanding, not having the correct understanding of value. So the theory of value that Aristotle started and which continued on until the marginal revolution is referred to as the labor theory of value. All these names are clunky. Sorry, I didn't make them up. We're kind of stuck with them because that's what everybody's using. But the labor theory of value says that again, value comes from the work and resources that go into a product, and and without belaboring it, um, essentially, um, labor is the ultimate resource. If you want to have some wheat to put into the product, somebody had to go out and plow the ground and plant the seeds and harvest the wheat, et cetera, et cetera. So it's just called the labor theory of value, that all labor is the source, the ultimate source of all value. And everybody always knew that there were problems with this because um, there are a couple of paradoxes. One, diamonds are very expensive, and nobody ever needs to own a diamond, but you can't survive a week without water, but water's cheap. How do we explain that? And the other thing is, an artist can paint a picture today and sell it for $300, and then die tomorrow, and suddenly the picture is worth $3,000. But no more work went into the picture. So for ages, people said, this isn't quite right. There's a problem here, but they couldn't figure out what the problem was. Finally, well, let's talk a little bit more about that. So the the labor theory of value, um, with that, the assumption is that the value is a property of the object. We've built value into the product with the work and the resources that we put into it. So if we're talking about a bottle of water, this water has certain objective properties. It's got a color, it's got a boiling point, it's got a freezing point. And so there's some value built in to these properties of this water. The properties give it a value. That's wrong. There, it is not that there are objective, it is not the objective properties of the water that gives it value. What gives it value, and what the great insight was in 1871, is that value is subjective. It's strictly in the mind of the person who wants it. It is not in the bottle of water. It has nothing to do. I mean, the person may want it because of the characteristics of the water, but the value is not inherent in the water. It is not an objective property that we can all look at and agree on. It is strictly in the mind of the person wanting it, which means that well, it's based on a whim, nothing more than, well, right now I happen to feel like water. It's the flimsiest of bases, and very hard to totally get your head around. And it changes everything. Um, Another offshoot of that is, because it's subjective, it's also incremental, and this is where the incremental or the marginal revolution names comes from. Because it's incremental, it means each bottle of water has a different value to the person who's valuing it. If you just got through running a race, you might really, really value the first bottle of water. But by the time you get to the last bottle of water, you might say, please, this is a burden. I don't want to carry it around. I'm sick of water. And so the same person just some minutes later can change how they value water from very highly to not at all. And then if you look across a whole population of people, every single person is doing that. So imagine the chaos of every person changing their whimsical subjective valuation of every product in every minute. It's insane. It's no wonder it took so long to recognize this is what's really going on. It seems just crazy. But it turns out that this view of value answers all the questions. It answers the diamonds water paradox. It answers the what happens when the artist dies later. It fixes everything. And and so for over 2,000 years, 2,500 years from Aristotle until 1871, when Karl Menger, the first Austrian economist, and a couple of other guys, Jevons and I think some Swedish guy, um, all three of them this same year recognized what was going on here and explained it as subjective value. And of course, in 1871, communications weren't such that they were talking to each other. So this is one of those crazy quirks in history where something bizarre happened that we don't quite understand. Maybe the general knowledge of everything came to a certain point. Who knows? But in 1871, the Austrian school was born with Karl Menger, and the overall marginal revolution kicked off. So okay, going through Aristotle, we talked about this. So now we come to the um, the marginal revolution in 1871. Suddenly, uh, Menger has figured out subjective value. And let me just quickly point out some of the other big guys here along the way. Adam Smith was 1776. He published The Wealth of Nations, maybe the most influential economics book ever written. Marx came along in 1848 with the Communist Manifesto, again, insanely influential and devastating to the human race across much of the world. The marginal revolution with Menger happened in 1871. And then Menger's student once removed, Mises, was 1922 with Human Action, the book we talked about earlier. And then John Maynard Keynes in 1936. This was another revolution in economics, which happened during the Progressive Era, which was from late 1800s. You could argue we're still living in it today. So just to kind of frame this in history. Um, so Adam Smith's thing was the invisible hand. I'm sure you've probably heard of that. Um, Adam Smith didn't untangle the mystery of value. We'll talk about that more in a second, but he did. He came up with the invisible hand idea that the economy seems to be guided by itself. It's not directed by anyone, and that all you need for to thrive is low taxes, peace, and a decent justice system. That was his admonition for what would take uh, a country, a nation, from the depths of poverty into opulent prosperity. And of course, we have to remember that everybody started in the depths of poverty. When when somebody talks about eliminating poverty, as if we were all born rich and now poverty is showing up, it's the opposite of that. We all started with extreme poverty, and we've worked our way out of it bit by bit. And some parts of the world and some parts of society have worked their way out better than others. But in the absence of doing anything, poverty is the it's the the default condition. So instead of thinking about fighting poverty, we should think about generating prosperity, because that's what actually happens. And in today's world, poverty is completely voluntary. There's no reason that anybody should be impoverished if they live in a system that doesn't hold back the forces of prosperity, and they're willing to engage and work in that system. So well, let's pass by this because we're going to go into a little bit more detail. But let's just summarize a little bit about objective value versus subjective value and what that means. So in the case of value, um, if we're being objective, we're stuck with the diamond water paradox. We have this idea that exchange is equal, that a bottle of water is worth $1.25, and and to the person who's selling it, it's worth $1.25, and to the person who's buying it's worth $1.25, because that's just what it is. It's $1.25. And and that leads to some goofy ideas like, well, why did you even exchange if you both thought it was worth the same thing? Um, and then it also gives rise to things such as exchange value versus use value, because which is really just kind of a confusion. Um, and in fact, is trying to sort of answer this question of why would you trade? Because because was my use value as use value, I value this bottle of water at $2, but the exchange value is only $1.25. So in that case, I come out ahead. So I'm gonna buy this bottle of water. But if that's true, then why would you buy one bottle of water? If the use value is, so you see the problem. There are a number of problems that arises. But if we looked at it from as a subjective element, then it fixes the paradox issue. It's clear that both parties gain from the transaction, so that explains why they would actually go to the trouble of making the transaction, and it gives rise to, we understand where market prices come from. So we were able to understand how prices happen in the actual market among real people, and that's important in some of the theoretical aspects of academic economics. It's not clear exactly how a market price even gets formed. In terms of money, um, the the objective notions are that money comes from the government, and government should manage that money, and as we said before, interest is evil. In Under a subjective value paradigm, money is just a market phenomenon that it emerges by itself. It should be managed by the market. Interest is simply the price of money, nothing more, nothing less, not good, not bad. Um, and that the price of interest should be found in the market, and whatever that is, it is. There's no moral overtones one way or the other. In terms of profit, the labor theory would say that profit is exploitation. Under subjective value, we see that profit is shared rewards, and that all the players are profiting all the time to the degree that they're furthering consumer interests. Uh, in the aspect of property, objective value can lead you to think property should be controlled publicly by the government. Uh, Conversely, subjectively, private ownership is the only way that people can make these subjective decisions. There is no objective way for a third party to value property and to decide how it should be disposed of relative to all the other options. It just can't happen. And so finally, this adds up under objective value paradigms, that market should be managed, money should be fiat, and should be regulated. And under the subjective value, you should have free markets, you should have sound market-based money, and there should be very little to hinder those things. So I think we've largely touched on this stuff. And just one point here. So Austrian economics began in 1871. It continued with Mises and Hayek and others into the early 1900s, and then it almost died. Um, we had the Keynesian revolution, and Austrian economics almost disappeared um, in the I guess the 1970s and 80s. Mises actually was the guy who carried it on, and then his work exploded through um, the Mises Institute at Auburn University and other things. And the Austrian school has just really flowered in recent years. I mean, in fact, today the president of Argentina is an Austrian economist, and I don't know if you guys are following that, but it's really interesting. The country of Argentina at one time was almost as rich as the United States. Certainly the richest country in South America, and just an opulent place. And then they adopted Keynesian practices and really a lot of Marxist practices. Still, there are more, I think, Marxists in Argentina than maybe anywhere else in the world. You can still, well, I haven't been for maybe 10 years, but back then you could still go out and see Marxist protest happening around the Capitol.
There
And
was there was a friend of mine years ago from South America. Actually, he was one of my MBA students I was in school with when I was getting my MBA, and he the joke he told was he said, and these guys are way too young to remember this, but back in the old days, long before you guys were born, they had the phonographs, right? The records, the big vinyl disc that would go around, and they would have 33 33 and a third revolutions and then they had the smaller ones, which were 45. And so this joke went, what's the similarity between the 33, long play record and Argentina? And the answer was, the punchline was, they both have 33 and a third revolutions per minute because Argentina had a lot of revolutions at one time. And John, I was just going to, these guys are too young to know that. I don't think they even get it. But I was going to ask if you could maybe just touch on what does Austrian economics mean? Because I don't think a lot of people have a real sense for why we call it Austrian economics.
yes. Yeah, thank you, Paul. Argentina is a fascinating place to study. In whatever you do, it's critical that you look at the history involved in anything. An engineer that doesn't understand the history of a steam engine is really handicapped in what they can understand and project. A doctor who doesn't know the history of penicillin cannot treat his patients as well as otherwise. And so similarly in economics, it's important to understand the history of Argentina, of where Austrian economics came from, where the different schools of thought. You really don't have a complete picture unless you understand the history. And then to Paul's question about where Austrian economics comes from, it's kind of interesting. It's cute. So Menger, the first guy to kick off the school, he was an Austrian. He lived in Austria, and of course he spoke German. Austria was part of the German world, and back at the time, again, communications were pathetically bad compared to today. Even, I mean, heck, you guys don't know, but I know Paul remembers. Um, Even in the 1970s, not that long ago, you would wait to call your grandmother on the phone after a certain time on Sunday night because that's when the rates went down.
Right.
You know, to make a phone call just outside your town costed extra, and so you and an overseas call, oh my God, they were, I mean, the meter was running like crazy, and so communication was very poor, and communication across languages was almost non-existent in many cases. And just like today, English speaking people don't speak other languages very much. English has dominated the world for a very long time, and science and politics and things are done in English. And so Anglophones aren't really forced to learn other languages, and they typically don't. And that's been true historically. So you would have like language islands where people in the German speaking world had very restricted communications with people in the English speaking world. Not even with notwithstanding the distance issue, which was another big issue. So a lot of difficulty in communicating. But Menger was an Austrian, and he came up with this very novel idea, um, and started developing the consequences of that idea. In Germany, the Germans practiced their economics was called the historical school, and they basically looked back at what had happened and said, well, you have to infer from that what can happen in the future, et cetera. And they looked at Minger's ideas with derision, and they said, oh, that's just an Austrian theory. Austrian meaning second or third class, not up to snuff with German ideas. And so that's where the label Austrian economics came from. Several other Austrians came after Menger as his students and continued developing it. But the source of Austrian economics is that's where the name comes from. But its distinctive property, I would say, is still that it's the only school that has fully embraced the notion of subjective value or the marginal revolution. Um, when the marginal revolution happened here in 1871, Marx had been doing his thing already for for what, over 30 years or so.
Yeah.
Um, and and Marx was quite influential. I mean, half the world succumbed to Marxism, and in fact, China is still there. Um, and like we said, it's still very strong in Argentina. But um, where I was going was the Austrian school has fully embraced um, the subjective theory of value, whereas here we are 150 years after the marginal revolution, and most of the schools of economics have not really figured out all of its implications. So that's why the Austrian school stands out. Um, another facet of Austrian economics is that the Austrians are the most rigorous and most theoretical of all the schools, and and their effort is all around understanding how things really happen with real people, not with some kind of phony robotic person or homo economicus, somebody who's just a calculator or somebody who's just a money grubber or whatever. The Austrians take actual human beings with all of their faults and all of their characteristics and their subjectivity and their whims and you name it, real human beings really acting in the real world with the constraints of scarcity and other people and the whole nine yards. So the Austrian school is they proceed, like I said, it's the most theoretical, the most rigorous, and it proceeds from the idea that humans act, hence the book Human Action. And and from this postulate that human beings act, then we keep going, so why do they act? Well, they act because they're trying to achieve something better in their condition. And they believe, rightly or wrongly, so there's no assumption that you're a genius or that you're infallible, but they believe rightly or wrongly that if their condition was different, then that they could arrive at a better spot. So by believing, okay, if I act, if I go take this cookie out of the cookie jar, then I'm going to be able to satisfy this desire I have for something sweet. And so the human acts, and then it continues to just build logically upon that. What is the world in which the human is acting? Well, it's a world of uncertainty. That's important. It's uncertain, which means it's not unknowable. It's not completely random. If it were completely random, there would be no reason to act because whatever's going to happen is going to happen. But also, it's not completely fixed because if it were, if all the outcomes were already preordained, well, there's no reason to act. So the fact that we're in an uncertain world means that we're able to act. It doesn't mean our actions will be fruitful. We may make a mistake, but this is the condition that humans are in. And so everything that every human is doing revolves around that. And you can build that out into a full system of economics that explains the laws of supply and demand and the whole nine yards. And yet doesn't send you down blind alleys like minimum wage laws is I don't know if you guys talked about minimum wage laws and their
Quite a bit.
impact. And so is there anybody in your class today, Paul, that thinks that minimum wage laws are a good idea? Or
I'm not sure. I suspect there's a few. We haven't we've talked about it quite a bit. And of course, we're in a very blue state that has, I think, probably one of the highest minimum wage laws on the books. So yeah, so I'm not sure I've ever asked you guys who, uh, anyway, we talked about it quite a bit.
let me just make my pitch. If Paul said there's zero, nobody here believes that nonsense, then I would shut up. But since maybe not, let me make my pitch for minimum wage.
Yeah, please.
Um, so the idea behind minimum wage laws is we want to help the poor. We want to help people who the market is not paying as much as we think they should. The market says your labor is only worth $2 an hour, and that's all we're going to pay you. And we feel like, well, that's an injustice, and we're going to insist that everyone be paid $5 an hour, not $2 an hour. Well, the the problem here is when we talk about the person earning $2 an hour, their labor is only worth $2 an hour. That person has very, very low skills. That's why their labor is worth so little. And that's the person we're trying to help, not just the poor. We're trying to help the poorest of the poor, the least skilled people, right? The people that people least want to hire. And so that's our objective with a minimum wage law. And what happens if we make that minimum wage, say $5, the employer, the only person who's willing to offer this poor slob a job at all, the only person who's willing to do that, he's paying $2 an hour because that's all the value he gets from that person, right? If that person had a if their skills were worth $3 an hour, they would go to work for somebody else because surely there's somebody who wants to pay only $3 an hour instead of $2 an hour, or I mean instead of $5 an hour. So if their skills were worth $3, they would get hired somewhere else. So we know that their skills are only worth $2 an hour, and for the person who's employing them, if all of a sudden they have to pay $5 an hour, well, they can't. And so they've only got a couple of options. One is they're going to just fire that person and stop doing that part of their business. Or two, they're going to go out and buy some sort of machines that can replace that person. I'll keep doing my business, but I'll do it without that person. Again, this person gets fired. Or if I still need a person, I can't replace them with a machine, and I still want to conduct this part of my business, I'm going to pay $5 an hour, but I'm going to hire somebody else who has more skills, and I'm going to give them more work to do, right? So even though you might say, well, look, the business A is still operating, they still have the same number of people there, but they're paying them more. Look at our success. No, those aren't the same people. They've taken off the very lowest skilled people, the exact people we were claiming to help, and they've unemployed them. That's the only thing that can happen. There is no other outcome. And and it could take some weeks or months or years for this to sort itself out. It may take time to buy a machine. It may time blah blah. But the only thing that can happen is that we have put a target on the back of the very lowest skilled workers and ensured that they can't have a job. This same thing applies to child labor. Um, Child labor is seen as oh this great evil, and the progressives came along and said we're going to outlaw that. We're not going to let children work. There are two sides to this coin. There's sort of the indignation that we would have children working, and then there's always also the darker side of, you know what, we don't want children competing with us for our jobs. We don't want children pulling down the wages of adults who are working. And and so by passing, the reason children work is because they need to eat. When their family is so poor that they can't support themselves without the children working, then children work. And that's been the case all through history. It's only when a society becomes rich that the family can allow their children not to work and let them grow up in the way we've become accustomed to as children and going to school and that sort of thing. And I would even argue that we've overdone that tremendously. The fact that we don't allow kids that are 15 to work without permits and licenses and yada yada is crazy. Some of the best education people get is from paper routes and other early jobs. But in any event, it's the same thing with child labor. Children work when they must work to eat. And back in the early days of the progressive era in England, when they outlawed child labor, they threw all the kids out of the factories because Charles Dickens said, "Oh, these conditions are so terrible." And these children went to much worse conditions. They became thieves and prostitutes. And so in the rush to do something good and moral, they actually did something very, very harmful. And and this is commonplace in economics because um, one's view of economics shapes your entire worldview. What is possible, what is not possible, what's a good thing, what's a bad thing. And so if you have bad economics and you take this narrow focus that Hazlitt talked about, you can say, I've done a wonderful thing by kicking kids out of the factories, when in fact you've done a horrendous evil thing. and yet you go around for the rest of your life patting yourself on the back. This is the progressive archetype, a lot like Mr. Magoo. Maybe you guys don't know Mr. Magoo. Uh,
You
it's
probably
this
don't.
guy who stumbles.
You guys know Mr. Magoo? No.
What about the Pink Panther? Are you guys up on the
They say, yeah, they know the Pink Panther.
yeah? So Inspector Clouseau stumbles around, dumping paint on people and running into their cars, and it just has no idea that it's happening. That's what happens if you have this myopic view of economics that keeps you from seeing the wider impact of your actions. So sorry, that was kind of a long digression there. But that's the Austrian school. That's where the Austrian school comes from, and that's why it's different from other schools. I've got a short bibliography here of um, that you guys may not be interested in, but these are some of the important books. The Economics book by DK. This is a cool, very recent book by a, a great guy in London. It's a very fair look at all the different schools, including the Austrian school. The Austrian school in America tends to be somewhat undernoticed. It's quickly growing today, as we'll talk about, but that's a worthwhile book. And then some of the others, this one also, Tom Woods wrote The Church and the Market back in 2005. And for Christians, this is a really interesting look at where the church has historically been with regard to the market and prices. And it hasn't always been, in Argentina, again, the Catholic Church is Marxist as it can be. The current Pope is from Argentine, and he's a Marxist. And liberation theology took over the Catholic Church. I don't know, back in sometime in the mid to late last century. And so the Catholic Church today and many other Protestant churches have had sort of a bias against the market in many cases, but that wasn't always the case. Thomas Aquinas and many religious thinkers were very enlightened about. In fact, those guys eventually um, overturned the usury laws. Um, Aristotle started with money should be sterile and usury interest is immoral, and the churches picked that up and carried it. A lot of persecution of Jews and that sort of thing as a result. But over time, the Catholic Church came to an understanding that actually interest isn't evil; it's just the market acting and yada yada. So there's some very interesting things there about the church and the I would say that the modern church has been led astray by the progressive movement, just as the field of economics has. So that's my plug for Tom's book, The Church and the Market. Really great book for Christians. Um, so let me again, if I haven't beaten this up enough, I want to look at it one more time in a slightly different viewpoint, just to maybe crystallize it better for you. So in economics, we've got a spectrum that goes from free markets to Marxism. Free markets mean that no one is interfering with two people's exchanges. It's totally free market. On the other end of the spectrum, you have Marxism, and under Marxism, essentially everything is controlled and managed by the government. I say essentially everything because it's actually impossible for it to be 100%. In the early days of the Soviet Union, they actually had some places in their communist fervor where they outlawed prices and they tried to implement absolute by the book Marxism. Literally within a year, those places were starving. There was nothing to eat. They were literally starving. I'm not talking about the purposeful starvation in Ukraine that Stalin did later. I'm talking about a, a, a small area where people implemented honest to God Marxism by the book and were very quickly starving. And so they had to back off from that and sort of did the best they could with Marxism, which meant extreme poverty, but at least it wasn't starvation. And so that's the far end of the spectrum, Marxism, almost total control. On the free market end, you've got almost no control, this zero control. There are a few places where you can see something similar to that. Hong Kong before the Chinese took it back, Singapore. Um, but in between the two, there's an entire spectrum, and that regulation, bold experiments, a mixed economy, national socialism, state capitalism. There's this whole range of things. And these are all just euphemisms for you're going to be poorer and less free. And where you fall on this spectrum determines so many things. The way we got here, again, we started with Aristotle. Aristotle got a lot of things right. He got this theory of value wrong. That carried on all the way to Adam Smith, who figured out a lot of great stuff about capital and specialization, but he didn't untangle the riddle of value. He kept the labor theory of value. And coming on after Smith then was Karl Marx. And Marx kept the labor theory of value, and he said, well, okay, look, if the source of all value is labor, then if anybody else is getting a piece of the action, like maybe this greedy capitalist over here, then the labor is being exploited. And that justifies violent revolution for the worker to take back what truly belongs to him. And we hear these words, violent revolution and take it back and everything belongs to the labor. But and maybe we think of it as not being literal. These people took it literally. There was back in the do you guys know the magazine Mother Jones? Is that on anybody's radar? Have you heard of Mother Jones magazine?
They're all saying no.
No. So Mother Jones is a left-wing magazine today. It's still being published, and it takes its name from this woman back in the early days, in the 1920s and 30s of the early labor movement. There was a woman called Mother Jones, a little 5 foot tall, 80-something-year-old woman who was unbelievably energetic, and she traveled around the country um, ginning up support for labor unions and organizing laborers. She was a real firebrand. She was in the middle of in West Virginia. The West Virginia coal miners had some really ugly confrontations between the mine owners and the miners. And Mother Jones was right in the middle of that. And her speeches were straight out of Marx. All these mines belong to the workers. Everything belongs to the workers. The companies are screwing them, and maybe the companies were screwing them in a way. I can't say for sure, but if they were, it wasn't because the workers owned the mine. It was for other reasons. But Mother Jones was was such a firebrand. She I don't know where she read Marx, but she obviously did because she spoke his stuff. At one point, she was leading an army of coal miners down the road to to have some confrontation with somebody. and the uh, the the mine operators actually set up a machine gun, a Gatling gun, uh, on the side of the road and said, "We're going to shoot you all down if if you try to pass this point." Mother Jones actually went and put her hand on the gun and said, "This gun is owned by the workers. They created the coal that made the steel that this gun is made out of. The bullets belong to them. The gun belongs to them. You will not uh, deploy this gun against these workers who own the gun." And by the way, there I have 500 other guys up in the woods above us with guns who are going to shoot you if you do. So that was the speech that this little woman gave, and the mine owner stood down, and her army passed and did his thing. It was a complete bluff about the 500 guys up in the woods, but this feisty little woman pulled it off. And my point here is that ideas are incredibly powerful, and these wrong ideas that Marx had engendered so much harm and evil throughout the world. So anyway, here's Marx's ideas, and that leads us to Marxism and all those terrible things. Shortly after Marx, Menger came along, as we said, and ushered in well, he solved the problem of value and ushered in the marginal revolution. At this time, okay, we're 20, 30 years after Marx. We've had all these known problems with the labor theory of value for over 2,000 years. Marx has taken the labor theory of value and built this giant structure of Marxism, which is now rolling into the social world. Menger comes along and completely undermines it. Once Menger establishes the subjective theory of value, Marx is dead in economics. There, overnight, no more economists believe Marx, but Marx is not dead in the social field. This, even today, you'll hear people talking about use value and exchange value and many of these Marxian kind of ideas. Um, so the point is, even though intellectually Marx was destroyed, it carried on. Um, Menger's the first Austrian economist, and then we had Mises after him, and then Hayek after him. Hayek won the Nobel Prize and became very well known. And these guys pointed the way to free markets with the subjective theory of value. That was the last piece of the puzzle to understanding exactly how markets work. And so all these guys went to work explaining markets. And that's given rise to leaders today like the Pauls, Ron Paul and Rand Paul, um, Thomas Massey in the House of Representatives, Vivek Ramaswamy, who knows might be president in 4 years, um, Javier Milei, who's the president of Argentina and is a straight up Austrian economist. It's worth, we probably don't have time right here, but it's worth checking out what's going on in Argentina. Milei is making radical changes and having radical impact. Their inflation rate has gone from, I don't know, 100% a year to 5 or 6 or something. It's phenomenal what's happening there. It's very worth checking out. But so we had Mises and Menger. Mises also put some very big nails in Marx's coffin, and so they were destroying Marx. And then during the period of the Great Depression, John Maynard Keynes came along, and so during the Depression, um, the left was vilifying capitalism for the problems that the left had caused. To make a long story short, the debt of World War One and the inflation by the Federal Reserve, um, caused the crash of 1929, and then the intervention of Hoover and Roosevelt made it worse. And so we had this worldwide Great Depression. And the left um, pointed the finger at capitalism. Capitalism is bad. But our only other option is communism, and communism by then people could see was really bad. And so Keynes came along and said, you know what? Capitalism really does suck. It's full of market failure. It's inherently unstable. But don't worry, you don't have to be a communist because I have a third way. And with that, he gave us managed economies, which, as Keynes said in his in the forward to one of his books, he said, "My system works much better in a fascist economy like Germany has today, rather than in a market economy." But Keynes totally dominated Hayek and Mises in the propaganda war. For one thing, he was speaking English while they were speaking German or some very bad English as a second language. And secondly, Keynes was very smart, a great rhetorician, and totally not constrained by the truth. He would say one thing one day and something else the next if it was more convenient. And so this was an incredible triumph over half truths and clever remarks. Oh, in the long run, we're all dead. Um, Over careful, reasoned analysis by the Austrians. Nevertheless, he won. He won hands down. So the whole world became Keynesian after World War II. There were tremendous problems with it, and Milton Friedman and others came along and said, wait, we have to pull this back toward the market. And so Friedman and these guys, um, they basically used Keynes's framework, but added some more market stuff to it. So we ended up with the basically these are the four clumps of economic schools we have today. There's the Marxists, the Keynesians, the biggest group, the monetarists or neoclassicals, and then the Austrians. So I guess the Marxists are the smallest group and certainly the most disreputable. The Austrians are maybe the next smallest, but growing quickly. The Keynesians, I would say, are quite big, but sort of dying. According to Keynes, you couldn't have both high inflation and high unemployment. But in the 1970s, we did have that, and that discredited Keynesianism a lot, and we've moved more toward monetarism and the neoclassical since then. So these are the four main schools, and I've tried to put them here in a framework where you can see where they come from and what the biggest changes are between them. And so just to kind of summarize the four schools, Marxism, you got poverty, repression, and excuses. That's what it produces. We don't have to say a lot more about it because it's a total disaster. Keynesianism is a mess. Big focus on spending, this fetish about the GDP. He has an equation, Y equals C plus I plus G, consumer spending plus industry plus government. It seems very scientific. He has an equation. We call this scientism. It's mimicking science in a place where it doesn't really belong. It has the appearance of science, but it's really not. Very focused on spending and consumer demand. You may have heard of some of these things: the multiplier effect, animal spirits. In the long run, we're dead. The veil of ignorance, the camping trip. I don't know how many of these fallacies you might be acquainted with, and But if these are some of your favorites, please bring them up and say, hey, tell me about this one. If you already understand that they're fallacies, then we won't worry about them. So that's the Keynesian school, very, very big on government intervention in the economy. And then you have the neoclassicals, which are sort of Keynesian light. They've taken the Keynesian focus of big aggregates, GDP and unemployment. These big aggregated statistics are very difficult to do anything with. How are we doing on time, Paul? I don't want
We,
to.
we're doing good. We've still got about half an hour before we have to have a hard stop.
All right. Um, so these big aggregates are a problem. Over here with GDP, this is national income accounting. We're adding up all these different things in the economy. So and it really doesn't make sense. You in the fourth grade they told you that you can't add things together that are different. If you add a goat and a pair of scissors, you don't have two of something. There's you have to have two goats, right? You can only add things that are similar. In this case, we're taking consumer, we're taking a ham sandwich and a tractor and a bureaucrat and adding them together and claiming it means something. Um, that's a big problem. And then further, we're claiming that we can measure that. There's an old joke. How do you know that economists have a sense of humor? The answer is that they use decimal points. And so here we're adding up all these things in the economy to the tune of trillions of dollars and claiming that we can measure it within a tenth of a percent change. And furthermore, that if we have 0.1% growth, well, at least we're operating. Whereas we have negative 0.1 for a couple of quarters, we're in a recession. Oh my God, it's a big difference. But we're talking about 0.2%, which we can't even measure that accurately anyway. I mean, go ask an economist, what are the error bars on GDP? We've said that our total economy is say $4 trillion, and so what are the error bars? Plus or minus. Well, they can't tell you because there is no real standard to measure it against, right? If we were measuring the boiling point of water, and sometimes we got 100.1, or sometimes we got 100.7, sometimes we could compare that to what we know is the real number, 100, and we could draw error bars around that and know how close were we. You can't do that with this because there is no standard, no absolute standard that this is what was right. So it's just whatever we happen to say it is. That's crazy. And then you're going to base your entire economic policy on this. On top of that, go back and look. You don't find out what GDP is till a quarter later, and then they keep revising that for another 2 or 3 quarters. What? What is this system? You're going to change the money supply based on that? It's crazy.
Crazy.
So the neoclassicals, they're kind of Austrian light. They still believe in the basic Keynesian framework. For Austrians, the Austrian school tries to understand humans as they really are, not people who are prescient or angels or anything like that. And that also includes to the humans who happen to be in government. Neither are they prescient or angelic. In fact, they may be the worst of us. The Austrians completely embrace subjective value. On that score, the monetarists, the neoclassicals might say, "Oh yeah, we get subjective value. We accept that," but in fact, only on the surface. The typical view of price formation for these guys is that um, Marshall Marshall made this analogy. He said it's like a pair of scissors. It's like a pair of scissors. On one side of the scissors, you have the market price, which is based on subjective value, right? That price was found based on subjectivity. But then on the other side, you have the cost of the business. And that cost is, well, we just added it up in our accounting system. And so we have an objective cost, and our sales price must be higher than that cost or we'll go out of business. So you have scissors that's half subjective and half objective. But what they don't bother to notice is that your cost, where did your costs come from? Your costs were things you bought in the market. And you bought that, you bid that away from the person who thought he had the next best use for it. That was also a subjective valuation. So both costs and sales, it's all subjective. It's all floating on the sea of subjectivity. The neoclassicals don't grasp that. Another thing about Austrian economics is this realization that because of subjectivity, we can't say we can say I would rather have an orange than a peach, but we're not able to say how much more. We could say we might say a lot more. I don't really like peaches, but we can't say I want the orange 4.37 times more than I want the peach. We can't quantify it. So we can only rank things. The neoclassicals will say that you're a calculator and that you go get a basket of goods and you add up all of what they cost and you find some optimum among that. Well, go find me somebody who actually does that. It doesn't happen. That's not what people do. What they do is that they say, I prefer this to that right now. And so what we're able to do is rank our preferences, but we can't assign um, cardinal numbers to them. So what you have with the Austrian school is much more real world. It's also much more modest because um, the Austrians recognize that humans change their mind and that we're not able to predict their future. You know, in physics, we can predict the boiling point of water in the future because it doesn't change. Because water is a mineral. Water has no choice but to boil at 100 degrees. In fact, if you have something that doesn't boil at 100 degrees, it's not water, right? It is its property. It identifies the water. But humans aren't like that. And so the Austrians deal with humans as they actually are, not as what would be convenient. I actually had a neighbor who was a neoclassical economist, and we were talking about fiat versus hard money. And he said, well, you have to have fiat money because you have to be able to control the value of money. The value of money has to be stable, or else our models wouldn't work. Really? So he wants the world adjusted to fit his model rather than trying to build a model that fits the world.
Yeah.
Um,
I have a question going back to that previous chart you had up there. Where would you put behavioral economics in this scheme?
um, I would put them in the Keynesian light category. They're certainly not Austrians. Um, you've got the public choice school, which in public choice, the kind of the idea behind public choice is that humans act in their interest, and that also applies to humans who happen to be in government positions. I think the behavioral economists are sort of in that vein, that they're trying to look at human motivations, but I also see them sort of jumping the shark. Kind of there's a certain arrogance in all of these other guys in that they say we understand how people behave in the monetarist realm. They often say people are rational actors, and then the somebody criticizing them will say, aha, well, look, here's something irrational that someone did. Your model is crazy. And it is crazy. People don't always behave rationally. The Austrian school doesn't assume rational behavior. And I think that the behavioral economist people, they also kind of un, unchain themselves from or unconstrain themselves with the constraints on what we can know about people and sort of assume more than you can about how people are going to behave. That's kind of my feeling about them. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. And maybe it's kind of an outlier too, not even part of any of these other schools. I've heard that analysis quite often.
You also have the MMT people, the modern monetary theory, and they're kind of Keynesians on steroids. They're an outlier, and their thing is spending is everything. Fiat money is everything. Just print and why even bother to collect taxes? Just print the money you want and spend it. And they were actually gaining a lot of traction recently, um, until still we had this recent bout of inflation, and then they've gotten very quiet. But the MMT people were saying, "Oh no, just print. It's not going to cause inflation. Don't worry about it." And now I think they're a bit chastened. But yeah, there's another one that's sort of an outlier, I'd say. This is a young economist told me this about, we were talking about the Austrian school. He said, yeah, they're right, but they don't have any influence. In other words, it's not good for my career to be an Austrian. The Federal Reserve funds monetarists and Keynesians. Um, but, you have to think about this. What's your purpose in life? Are you trying to find the truth, or are you trying to be influential? And it's kind of interesting that the truth frequently wins out. Today, like we said, the president of Argentina is an Austrian. Vivek Ramaswamy is basically an Austrian. We're turning Elon Musk into an Austrian. Joe Rogan is about to be an Austrian.
Mhm.
We're actually the biggest influence today is the Austrians, and who knows how far that goes. But it's a really exciting time to be an Austrian. So let me give you one more Austrian view here. One of the things, does everybody, I imagine, knows the circular flow diagram? Has everybody
Yes.
seen that?
Yeah.
The circular flow diagram was invented by Keynesians to apologize for Keynesian ideas. Um, it's a mess. So here's an Austrian view of the economy. Let's say that this box is the economy. The way it works is natural resources go into the box, trees, dirt, water, whatever we have around. And then products we want come out of the box, houses, airplanes, whatever we want. If we look inside the box, what we see is a bunch of businesses all networked together. And what these businesses are doing is they're taking natural resources and they're converting them to products. And they do that, each one of these rectangles is a business. And so step by step, they're converting natural resources into products. If we zoom in, each business has its own tools that it uses for whatever piece of this process it's doing. And those tools, we have a fancy word for tools. We call it capital. And that can be a machine, it can be an office building, it can be intellectual capital, it can be financial capital. But there's some sort of capital that this business needs in order to convert this raw material it has into this product that's coming out. And in addition to their capital, they have workers. And these are specialized workers that know how to use these particular tools. So if you zoom out, you see a network of businesses. All of them have capital and workers, and what they're doing is converting natural resources into products. So this is land, labor, and capital. This is the three components that we talk about in economics, but this is how they're laid out and put together. And if we take away everything except the capital, here we see the capital in the economy. This is called the capital structure. This is an Austrian concept that others don't use, but the capital structure means the point is you have to have the right tools in the right amount in the right location. And if you do anything else, you're wasting the stuff. You're wasting the capital and you're giving yourself less output. This capital develops over time. It grows as businesses invest. And so this is something that organically grows in a market economy. In order for capital to grow, sorry, in order for to grow, it needs certain conditions. It needs property rights. Nobody's going to invest in capital and maintain it if they're not allowed to own it, if it can arbitrarily be taken away from them. So it needs property rights and it needs a rule of law. We need to know where the border of one person's property is versus another so that we can build up to that property or so that we can dispose of that property. So property rights and rule of law are indispensable for a market economy. So this is here again, this is the whole economy. We call this the structure of production. How have we arranged all the various pieces in order to make the most products using the least natural resources? And how do we know what products to make anyway? Well, what everybody's doing is trying to make the things that consumers want the most. So this is frequently called a consumer-directed economy because the first thing everybody's interested in is making this stuff for consumers. And then, so if I'm going to make a car, I need car parts. So now I need to, if I'm going to have car parts, I got to make car parts. So if I'm going to make car parts, I need some steel. I need some steel. I got to go mine some iron ore. So everything is driven from the consumer. And the person who does that is the entrepreneur. The entrepreneur is responsible for organizing all these pieces together. So land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship are the four factors of production. You probably heard that in your economics book, right? They probably mentioned these four factors of production, but I bet you hardly heard a word about capital afterwards, right? So here's thrown out as, wow, this is one of the four most important things, and then they're silent. Why is that? A lot of that is because capital is different than everything else. Capital accumulates over time. And what most economists want to do today is take an accountant's view of adding things up across a year and seeing what happened. But you can't do capital across a single year. Capital has a very long life. And so it screws up the calculation. So they just ignore it. And they'll say, oh, well, we're going to assume it's constant, or we're going to assume it away. That's not the real world. So there we go, land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship. And so one more important piece of this is, how does a business know how much capital to invest? And they do that by looking at the prices on either side of a business. All these little P's represent the price of these various pieces. And so for a business, it looks at the cost of its raw materials and the price of its products, and that they figure out whether or not they're making a profit. If they make a lot of profit, then they reinvest in the business and they grow more capital. So the capital structure is driven by what we call the price structure. The price structure is just a snapshot of all the prices in the economy. So these P's here are the price structure that drives the capital structure. Without a price structure, you can't have the best capital structure. Without a capital structure, you can't have a good economy. This is the story in every communist country. They don't have prices, they don't have property. So they end up investing all their capital in giant concrete plants. That's what the Soviet Union did. And so they made more concrete than anybody in the world. But you couldn't get a ham sandwich because they didn't invest enough in pigs and wheat. So and if you go to the former Eastern Bloc, it's really worth the trip. Look at the Soviet architecture. It is the biggest, ugliest concrete stuff you ever saw. Statues, buildings. It is so ugly. it is like built into the anti-human nature of Marxist philosophy. Ugly architecture just had to come out of that. Now, a question here is, okay, so entrepreneurs are organizing the economy. A 12-year-old put this piece of this together, so that's why it's like it is. Um, the question is, are entrepreneurs geniuses, and do they always get everything right? And the answer is, well, no, they make a lot of mistakes, and when they do, they get whacked like a whack-a-mole because we have a system of profit and losses, and the losses may be the most important piece because that's how we weed out our mistakes. So there you have it. This is an Austrian view of the economy. It takes into account people as they really are. It takes into the account the physical nature of the economy as it really is, not something that we imagined. It's not something that's easy for us to model. And this is a bit more on the same thing. Sorry, I didn't was able. This is our model here will run in 3D, and what we're showing. Sorry, the controls are a little bit goofy. What I wanted to do is run it and stop it. Okay, now I got it. So what we're showing here, this is the economy below it. And then what's happening here, this is banking. And so people who have money to lend are putting it into the bank, and people who want to lend the money are borrowing the money from the bank. And that's beautiful. That's the way things should be. This is traditional banking. And the bank is serving as a middleman. It's going out and finding the people who want to lend and hooking them up with the people who want to borrow. They're the Airbnb of money. That's perfectly cool. But now, this is what we call credit expansion. And now we're allowing the banks to lend out more money than they've taken in. This is an unstable banking system because now the bank is lending out 5 or 10 times as much money as it has in deposit. And this is what leads to bank runs and banking crises. As if that weren't bad enough, the way this happens is they make laws. The bankers buy off the politicians, and the politicians say, okay, look, it's fine for you to lend out more money than you take in. That would be considered fraud otherwise. And when you get caught and have a bank run and you're crashing, we'll come rescue you, and we'll say, okay, no, you don't have to return all the money to your customers. That's what credit expansion leads to. And if that's not bad enough, then we come along and we get the Federal Reserve, which gives the banks even more money and allows the amount of credit to expand even further, which further destabilizes the economy. This is the source of the 1929 crash and the Great Depression. This, by the way, is called the Austrian business cycle theory. And there are a few other theories out there. Check them out for yourself. Don't believe me. Go and look at these things, and you will find their explanations laughable. Laughable. All right, so I think that's what we've got for you today. If we have time and you guys have questions, I would love to customize or whatever if we could.
We have a couple of minutes for questions, guys, everybody. I think they're probably getting ready to go to their next final exam. John, this has been very, very great. Really, guys, just stay put for a minute, please. Thank you so much for your time on this and a really great presentation.
No, thank you.
Stop
it was a blast.
Let me see here.